Remember chapters 4 and 5? After the letters to 7 churches, we come to chapters 4 and 5, and we're going to start by gaining perspective. It's like going to the top of the building and looking down, and you can see all the streets. When you're on the street, and there aren't good signs, things like that, you can get lost like in a maze. But if you're up above, you get the right perspective. Chapters 4 and 5, we get godly perspective. John's told to come up here. So his vision is from a heavenly perspective. And while he's up there, he sees these elders in heaven, these old people. How many are there?
24.
What's the significance of 24 elders?
12.
Yeah, we're going to run into 12 a lot. We already talked about numbers. We're going to see them again tonight. We're going to see 7, 12, 24, and 144,000. We're going to get all those numbers tonight. So we've got the 24 elders representing Old Covenant, New Covenant, all God's people, or leadership of all God's people. But as far as representing them, there they are in heaven. How many living creatures do we have? 4. There are 4 living creatures. Do you remember the faces of the 4 living creatures? Lion.
Eagle.
Eagle will be last. So lion, eagle, what are the other 2?
Gorilla.
Orangutan.
We start with the lion, then we go to the powerful one. If you want a team of oxen, yeah, we've got the face of a lion, then the ox, and then the third one is man, representing intelligence, and then we've got the eagle. Each one of these living creatures have how many wings?
4.
6.
2.
6 wings. Yeah, 4 living creatures. 4 living creatures. 6 wings. And what's unusual about their wings?
To cover their mouth.
No.
They have eyes.
Oh.
Covered with eyes. All over. Covered with eyes. Okay, you guys are having too much fun. Okay. What must take place means what? 2 times in the book. We're going to see it again tonight. No. We saw it in the first chapter, and we saw it in the 4th chapter. We're not going to see it tonight. But this phrase, what must take place? What's significant about that phrase? Do you remember this?
It must happen orally for God to be just.
It is, say it louder.
It has to be done morally for God
It's
to
a
be just.
moral necessity. It's a moral necessity. He's not saying these things have to take place for any historical reason. He's saying for God to be a just God, He cannot let this go on any longer. So there's going to be punishment. Things are going to be taken care of. Things will be reconciled. One of the questions that the saints are going to ask God is how long? Not if He's going to take care of it. We know He's going to take care of it. But how long do we have to wait? It's a moral necessity that these things take place. Question number 4. What color was the rainbow? Green. Which automatically tells you this is not a normal rainbow. Just a reminder. We need these reminders because with all these symbols, all these pictures, it's easy to get caught up in the picture and think that the picture means something. No, it's a symbol signifying something else. And so every now and then the rainbow will be green, and it's a reminder to us. Don't get fixated on the fact that it's a rainbow. Green represents what?
Earth.
Earth, okay. What did God have on His right hand? You notice the preposition I used there? Most translations say in His right hand. It's not a good translation. It's the Greek preposition epi, which means on or upon. But He had it on His right hand. What was on His right hand?
Scroll with writing on both sides.
Yeah, scroll with what?
Writing on both sides.
Yeah, writing on both sides. Excellent. And what else is on that scroll? Writing on both sides?
7 seals.
7 seals. 7 seals. Okay, what's the significance of it being on His hand? It's not in His hand. On His hand meaning
He's giving.
offering it. Can anybody come up here and take this? Can anybody open it up and see what, the overview of history? What has gone on, what will go on into the future? Doesn't this kind of hint at God's foreknowledge, being able to see into the future? Here we go. Okay. Why did John cry?
Nobody worthy to break a seal or open.
Yeah, they announced it. Who's worthy to come? Oh, by the way, what does the word worthy literally mean?
Was it weight or heavy?
Heavy. He didn't say who's worthy. He says who's heavy enough. Who's heavy enough to come up here and take the scroll and open it up and break the seals. Because weight in the Bible signifies what?
Power.
Glory. Significance. That's right. What's really important. We still use the term today when we talk about something's weighing on me. It means I can't get it out of my mind because it's not one of those little flighty things that doesn't have any weight to it, that kind of comes and goes, just part of every day. Oh no, this has weight. It has significance. So it's okay to translate it worthy as long as you understand the background where that comes from. So John cried, but it was premature, right? He cried too soon because somebody was able to come forth, and the one who was able to come forth was announced as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. What did the Lion of the tribe of... He says, here we go. We found somebody who's got enough weight, who's worthy. It's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Also, he says it's the root of David. Okay, from the line of David. So he turns around to see him. And what does the Lion of the tribe of Judah look like?
Sacrifice lamb.
A lamb standing upright that's been slaughtered. That's a gruesome picture for you. Well, don't picture it. Because again, don't get lost in the picture itself. What is this symbolizing? What is this telling us? In what sense is Jesus a lamb? Behold, the Lamb of God who comes to take away the sins of the world. That's what John the Baptist said. First time he meets Jesus in his ministry, right?
Perfect sacrifice.
Okay, the sacrifice that gets us right with God. Being slaughtered, he shed his blood, he had to die. Standing upright, he was dead, now he's alive again. Hey, that's the way you introduced him in the first chapter. I was dead, now I'm not. Okay, so here we have the slaughtered lamb standing. What do the... Oh yeah, this lamb has how many horns?
4.
No. What is this? Who does this lamb represent?
Jesus.
Jesus. Jesus wouldn't have 4, because 4 is the symbol of what?
Earth.
The earth. How many does Jesus have? 7.
Oh,
7. What's the number 7 represent?
Complete.
perfection.
Complete perfection and holiness or sacredness, right? Okay, when Jesus is described, this happened, 3 times last week in the 2 chapters. We're going to see this one again tonight. He's not just described as somebody who has glory and honor. No, he's somebody who is great glory, honor, praiseworthy, and a couple other things. Because they're going to have 7. They're going to say 7 things when they glorify him, because that's a number that's appropriate for him. So he has 7 horns. What do the horns represent?
Power.
Power. And this all the way through the scripture, when horns are used symbolically, always represent power. So Alexander the Great had what kind of helmet?
Big horns on it.
Yeah, he had the big old ram horns on the side. And there was a Cummins engine in his chariot. Okay, he had the big old ram horns because it signified power, and the reason horns represented power, again, think of yourself in a farming setting. Years ago, you didn't have to worry about animals who didn't have horns, not as much. But if they had horns, you had to watch out, right? And the bigger the horn, the more you tried to watch out. Those matadors, I just don't get that. Okay, what musical instruments are mentioned in heaven? Anybody but Mike can answer this.
Trumpets.
Harp.
Harps.
Oh.
Harps are mentioned. That's exactly right. And what do the gold bowls look like? I'm asking this because of the word bowl.
Saucer.
Most translations translate it bowl, but what is it?
Saucer.
Yeah. Later on, we're going to see some massive ones. But at this point, the idea is it's not a deep bowl. You can call it a shallow bowl or a deep saucer. But as long as you get this idea, it's very easy to spill things out of this. Not significant yet, but it will be significant later when we use the same term. So a very shallow bowl. So in chapters 4 and 5, we've gone to heaven, and we get this picture. God, in all of his glory, is in control. He's the creator, chapter 4. Chapter 5, Jesus, the Redeemer, the one who gets us right with God, and he's receiving praise. So that's where we finished up last week. We're ready for chapter 6. Here we go. Chapter 6 is going to start with the 4 horsemen. The 4 horsemen. So since we're in chapter 6, flip to the Old Testament before we even start reading, okay? Flip the Old Testament with the book of Zechariah, towards the very end of the Old Testament. Zechariah. And we're going to start with chapter 1 because 2 different times Zechariah is going to present us with images of horsemen. And we're going to see the relationship between, again, we're using the Bible to interpret the Bible, right? So the Bible's best commentary in the Bible. Look at the book of Zechariah. What is it? The third from the last book of the Old Testament. Zechariah, first chapter. Look at the first chapter. He's going to have these visions, just like John has vision, right? The book of Zechariah is fascinating because he has several night visions that are just powerful and beautiful. Some of them are a little harder to grasp than others. This one's not so easy until you get into the study of the book of Zechariah, but I think we'll at least get the flavor of this. Starting in verse 8, Zechariah chapter 1, it says, "During the night I had a vision, and there before me was a man mounted on a red horse." Does your translation say a different color? Does yours have red? Okay, that's fine. Colors are not easy to translate. Not easy to translate. So some translations, some colors, black, white, we don't have any problem with that. And usually red's okay too, but it's when you get off of those basic ones that sometimes it goes awry. Anyway, so he sees a man mounted on a red horse and standing amongst the myrtle trees in a ravine. So you got mountains on either side. He's in a ravine. There's myrtle trees. Behind him were red, brown, and white horses. Same colors? That surprises me if so, but that's fine. That's fine. We've got multicolored. What do you have?
Sorrel.
Okay.
Mine says chestnut brown.
Chestnut. Okay, there you go. Okay. Did I mention it's kind of hard to translate? Okay, well, we've got multicolored horses and we've got 4 of them represented again, right? And here's what I like in verse 9. I ask, what are these, my Lord? I love it when the guy, you're seeing a vision, you can't quite get it, and the guy in the vision says, can you explain this to me? The angel who was talking with me answered, I will show you what they are. The man standing amongst the myrtle trees explained, they are the ones the Lord has sent to go throughout the earth. This is the Lord's patrol. They represent forces from God keeping tabs on what's going on in the world. One of the reasons I love this first vision so much is what he's going to say next, verse 11. And they reported to the angel of the Lord who was standing amongst the myrtle trees. When you read this phrase, the angel of the Lord, what does that mean?
One.
If it says an angel of the Lord, I'll go with one. But when it says with the article, the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament signifies
Michael?
God.
Oh.
Probably Jesus.
I didn't know.
Probably Jesus. Because angels are not allowed to accept worship. The angel of the Lord can. And only God receives worship. There are several reasons why this is a clue to us. So, he says, he's going to give an explanation, and they report, so they're going, what are these 4 horsemen? They're sent from the Lord. Check out what's going on earth, which, by the way, spiritual forces, do most people see what spiritual forces are up to? Unless Elisha prays for you and you can open up your eyes or something. Most people don't see that, right? But they're going around and seeing what's going on. They report back to the angel of the Lord who is standing amongst the myrtle trees. Myrtle trees usually used to represent God's people. Trees often represent different nations when used symbolically. So he's standing amongst the myrtle trees. This represents God's people. And he's getting reports from the whole earth. They have gone throughout the earth and found the whole world at rest and peace. Okay, before we read any further, no war, everything's fine, nobody's fighting. Is that a good thing, bad thing? You just heard a report, hey, no more fighting, the world's at peace. Most of the time you think that's a good thing. That's why I like this vision. Verse 12, the angel of the Lord said, Lord Almighty, how long will you withhold your mercy from Jerusalem and the towns in Judah, which you have been angry with these 70 years? He's complaining. He says, God, how can you let this be? How can you let what be? The world at peace. Why is the world at peace a terrible thing? Because the world at peace is persecuting Christians. They're having peace. They're in control, which means it's a terrible time for God's people. I can't help but to think, you know what? We may broker peace with North Korea. What does that mean for the Christians? What does it mean for Christians right now in North Korea? You know what? North Korea is not fighting anybody right now. What does it mean for the Christians in North Korea?
Turn their attention
Oh.
on them.
Probably one of the worst places on the planet. Right? So anyway, he goes with that vision. It's fantastic, but flip over to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is still in the book of Zechariah. He says again, before me, at this very beginning of the 6th chapter, I looked again, and there before me were 4 chariots coming from between 2 mountains, mountains of bronze. Which, by the way, where were the 4 horsemen before? They were in a ravine between the mountains. Sometimes mountains represent overwhelming, powerful nations. So here we are between 2 bronze mountains. Represents something very powerful. The first chariot had a red horse, the second a black, third one white, the fourth one, what color is the fourth one?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's white.
Absolutely.
All of them powerful. And I asked the angel who was speaking to me, what are these, my Lord? And the angel answered me, these are the four what? Spirits of heaven going out and standing in the presence of the Lord in the whole world. And I don't have time to read the rest of this. I wanted to get, later on, go back and look at Zechariah chapter 3. He'll explain the rest of the vision in Zechariah chapter 6. Powerful visions, but in both these visions, the horsemen come from God. God. Sometimes we come to the 4 horsemen here with the seals and we automatically assume, well, this is bad. We assume sometimes war is bad. Use the Bible to translate the Bible and come to this with an open mind and use the scripture here and don't automatically assume that war is necessarily bad. Look at, let's go back to Revelation chapter 6. Revelation chapter 6, I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. Okay, what's the significance? Seals have to be opened before you can read what's written there. Written front and back, right? Because God knows everything. Knows all the details. Can tell you more than you ever want to know. Right? So there it is. But he opens the seal to reveal what? Well, some of the knowledge of God. Some of the knowledge of God about what? Am I asking this question right? What's written on the seal? Written on the scroll?
History.
Okay, there's seals that seal up the scroll. So you have to remember, it's not like 7 seals. There's one seal, and then you're able to roll the scroll open a little ways, and then there's another seal. You roll it open a little bit more. So we've broken the first one. We roll it open, and we're going to see a scene. What does that represent? What's on the scroll?
The history of the world.
History of the world. Probably yet to come. These are things known perfectly by God, but we don't know them yet. So God's revealing it. The only one who can reveal it's the Lamb, right? So Jesus. So he breaks the significance of the seal means you have to have the authority to do this. So he's got the authority to do this. So he breaks the seal and he opens it up. So what we are picturing here, these are things that must take place. What does it mean it must take place? God wouldn't be a fair God if this didn't take place. Okay, I've got to be careful when I say that because do you remember what Joseph said to his brothers after Dad dies, and his brothers come to him and say, Dad doesn't want you to kill us. Dad told us before he died, don't kill us. We really are sorry for what we did to you, selling you into slavery and stuff like that. Do you remember what Joseph said to his brothers? You meant it for evil, but God used it for good. There's a lot of stuff going on, bad stuff. God can still turn that stuff around and make good out of it. Makes all things together work together for good for those who love God, called according to his purpose. Even the bad stuff. So there are going to be some things that happen in history that I think it's probably unfair to say, well, God caused that. I think it's better to say God used that. God's given people free will. With free will, Joseph Stalin did some really bad stuff. A whole bunch of people have done some really bad stuff. But God can still use disasters and turn them around. God's in control. So here's a picture. The first seal. He breaks the first seal. And I heard one of the 4 living creatures. Now, if we take this in order, what's the first living creature?
The lion.
Okay, the one with the face of a lion. If that's the sequence here, then the face of the lion, living creature, comes, living creature say in a voice like thunder. Okay, before when we wanted to emphasize a loud voice, what metaphor did we use? A trumpet. Okay, why are we mixing metaphors here? I take it to be significant because we're not saying it's the voice of a trumpet. So it's more than just loud. It's more than just to get your attention. Where have we already seen thunder?
In the throne, or around the throne.
Around the throne. There was thunder and lightning and earthquakes, which represents what?
Presence of God.
Presence of God and awe of God, because if you're not right with God, well, picture in the Old Testament, Exodus chapter 19, when they came to Mount Sinai, what was it like? Thunder, lightning, earthquake.
Yeah.
People were scared to death, appropriately so. What was the decree? If you came too close to the mountain, what happened?
You would die.
You would die. Okay. Probably represents the authority and the power of God. Probably also represents, when we talk about thunder, judgment. Judgment. Probably. Nonetheless, you get this powerful picture, right? The voice like thunder. He says, come, written in the Greek imperative, which means he's not saying, hey, come over here. He's saying, you have to do this. You have to do it. Who's he saying come to? He's not talking to John. He's talking to what we're going to see next, the first horseman. Verse 2, I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Okay, white, so far the book of Revelation has signified 2 different things. When white represents what?
Purity.
Purity, and what's the other thing? I guess I should say 3 things, because if you look at the white hair, Jesus is pictured as with the white robe, but white hair represents age, wisdom. But white has also been used symbolically already to talk about the victorious, the one who wins. Okay, so we've got the white horse over in Revelation chapter 19. I didn't give any of these out, did I?
No, you didn't.
Well, I didn't put Revelation 19 up on the board anyway, so that's okay. Over in Revelation chapter 19, Jesus is the one who's riding the white horse.
Yep.
Okay, the rider of the white horse here is not identified, so we can't say with certainty it's Jesus. But over in chapter 19, it is Jesus. So I'm personally partial to probably Jesus here. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind. And before we go any further, who will look up Genesis 4:10 for me? Okay, Matthew 10:34.
I will.
Matthew 24, verse 9.
I will.
Mark 13, verse 10.
I will.
And then Acts 14:22.
I got it.
And then Ezekiel 43:16 is probably enough. Who's got Ezekiel?
I got it.
Great. Well, appreciate that. Okay, so this first scene, we've got this rider on the white horse over in chapter 19. That's Jesus. The rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. Okay, you can just take this generically to mean at the most basic level, people are going to go fight against other people and some people are going to win. Hey, has that happened in the last 2,000 years? Sure it's happened. But if we use Revelation chapter 19, it kind of changes the flavor here. Because if Jesus goes out to conquer, in what sense throughout history has Jesus gone out to fight and conquer?
Never.
To gain our soul. To bring.
Is Christianity ever pictured as a battle?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, is there fighting that we do? Is there armor that we're supposed to wear?
Yes.
Yeah. So if he goes out to conquer, which by the way he does not lose, he wins. If he goes out to conquer, then what would this represent? This would represent the spread of Christianity. I really think that makes a lot of sense because what we're going to see next. First of all, you've got from the time that Jesus comes, and here we are, picture John getting to see this scene in heaven. and then we're going to roll open the scrolls, right? That talks about history. And Jesus does that. And the first thing you see is Jesus' people are victorious. They go all over the earth. Did that happen in the first century when John was alive? Yeah. They turned the world upside down. Turned the world upside down. They won spiritual victories. They were very much persecuted, which is going to get into the next few things we're going to see here in just a minute. But he's very much victorious. Verse 3, it says, when the Lamb opened the second seal. So that's the first picture, just the picture of conquest. The second seal, I heard the second living creature. Second living creature, that would be the... I don't like this because that looks more like a cow than an ox, doesn't it? But anyway, the face of an ox, right? He said, come. Again, in the imperative. In other words, this has got to happen. This is what's going to be happening in history, right? So God's people go out, and followers of Jesus, they conquer. Then another horse came out, a fiery red horse. Matthew chapter 24, verse 9. Did I give that one? Yeah. 24:9.
Oh, hold on. I'm getting there.
Then I'm going to get Matthew 10:34 right after that.
Oh, okay.
24:9. Who's got that?
Then they will deliver you to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name.
Yeah. You become a Christian. Join the winning team. And by the way, everybody's going to hate you, and you're going to be put to death when you do. When it happens to you. Doesn't that sound like horse 1 and 2? Sure does. Well, that's exactly what Jesus is warning his followers. What does it say in Matthew 10:34?
Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword.
Who said that?
Jesus.
Jesus. Jesus said that. Came to bring a sword. What kind of kingdom does Jesus have, according to what he said to Pilate?
Kingdom
Not of this world.
Not of this world. And the reason he was saying that is because he was emphasizing, don't look for the kind of fighting that you're thinking about. In fact, what had just happened before Jesus was handed over to Pilate in the garden, when there was a fight scene, potentially,
Oh,
who pulls out a sword?
Peter
And what does Jesus do about that?
fixes the ear that got cut
Fixes
off.
the ear. What does he tell Peter?
Put that away. We're
Put it
not-
away. Yeah. There is a fight, but it's not the physical kind of fight that we think about. He's, again, symbolically this fits. The writer was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given, okay, my translation says a large sword. Does yours?
Great.
Very unfortunate. Very unfortunate. Because there are two words for sword. One is a great big old sword, and it's not the word used here. This is the word for sword that means a dagger. Machaira. It's the kind of, in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which would be what? What's the Greek translation of the Old Testament? Septuagint. Greek translation of the Old Testament, when Abraham's ready to offer Isaac, he pulls out a machaira. It's a sword. It's not a knife, it's a sword, but it's a small sword. It's the kind of sword that you use in close combat. It'd be the kind of sword when you're off your horse and you're ready to fight man to man, right? This is the one you pull out. The word here does not mean big as in large. It means significant. It means he's going to wreak havoc with this sword, right? So the first picture is conquering. The second picture, fiery red horse, would be murder and people dying. Okay, let's follow the sequence here. Did Christianity go out and conquer the known world with the gospel message?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did Christians suffer as a result?
Yes.
Oh boy, did they. Persecution in the first 3 centuries was immense. Which, by the way, this reminds me, is Christianity still spreading?
Yes.
Yeah, many parts of the world is phenomenal. It just blows me away. I think I've shared this with you before because it just makes such an impression on me. When people think of world religions, you do know that Christianity's, people talk about Islam spreading all over the place. You know there are more Christians than Islamic Muslims, right? Nothing comes close to Christianity. It has spread all over the place. When you think of Islam, you usually think of the Middle East, don't you? There's some other places, Northern Africa, and because of immigration, now it's in Europe. But usually you think of spread like that. When you think of Buddhism, which geographical region do you usually think of as a stronghold?
Far East.
Yeah, the Far East. You know, China, Thailand, Burma, that area. There's different kinds of Buddhism and stuff like that. When you think of Hinduism, what do you think of?
India.
India. When you think of Christianity, if you think of it accurately, you cannot localize it, because about 20% of Christians are in Asia, about 20% are in Africa, about 20% are in Europe, about 20% are in the Americas. Did I do? We are spread out all over the globe and having that kind of impact. If this were really from God, which it is, and He wants everybody to be saved, doesn't that make sense? That it wouldn't be in just one region of the world, but it'd be all over the place? Okay, why do I bring this up? Because is Christianity still spreading? Yeah. Please don't think of white horse comes, goes, red horse comes, goes, black horse comes, goes. No, no, no. These horsemen, even though they're being laid out in sequence here, probably represent what he's saying is going to happen throughout history. So you're going to have the conquest of the gospel, people of Jesus Christ, and you're going to have persecution, you're going to have death because of Christianity. Next one would be in verse 5, when the Lamb opened the third seal. I heard the third living creature say, the third living creature would be what?
Man.
Man, face of a man. He said, come, imperative, has to happen. What has to happen? Look, there before me was the black horse. The rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Why would you use scales in everyday life? Don't think today, in front of the courtroom. Think back in the first century, who had scales?
The rich people.
Tax collectors.
Tax collectors.
Tax collectors did, rich people did. Who else had scales?
Business people.
Business people, marketplace. You saw them all over the place. Why? Because if you wanted to buy something, what'd you have to do?
Barter.
You had to weigh out your money versus what you got, right? So they use scales as far as commerce goes. Okay? The rider is holding a pair of scales in his hand. I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, what's the significance of the four living creatures? What do they represent?
Earth.
What goes on earth, right? Okay, what are they saying? He's saying 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages, and do not damage the oil and the wine. Okay, let's take this one at a time. He talks about 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages. That is, okay, even if we don't know the commerce of the day, I'm going to tell you in just a minute, and you probably have a footnote in your Bible, I'm guessing. It's easy enough to find out, but even if we don't know, if somebody said, I'll give you 2 pounds of wheat to make some bread, but it's going to take you everything you make today to pay for that. Does that sound expensive?
Yeah.
Sure does. Sure does. It's going to take your entire day's wage just to get your bread. So you don't have any fish, no vegetables. So I'm tempted to comment about that. But anyway, nothing else, just bread. That's all you get, right? For a full day's wages. And if you want different kind of bread, you're going to pay for it with another day's wages. This is 12 times more expensive than what wheat would usually sell for. Terribly expensive. So what's he talking about? Are there going to be difficult? People are going to be put to death. They're going to be persecuted. Is life going to be hard? Yep. Life's going to be hard. This kind of goes against health, wealth gospel, doesn't it? But it probably more accurately pictures what Christians in most of the world face today. Not just throughout history, even today. Yeah. When you become a Christian, many are the times. I was reading a book last week. The guy was talking about a lady in his church who was on a fast track. She was so successful in the business world. And she had made it, big corporation. She was like, in just a few years, she was in upper management until she was confronted with something where they were going to pull one over on stockholders or whatever. She did the right thing, got fired. She wouldn't go along with it. Torpedoed her fast track. This lady was making a lot of money. She could have been filthy rich in a few short years, right? And no doubt, that kind of talent, she's probably got another job by this time. But at that time, when the book was written, the guy was telling the story, there she was unemployed. And it looked really bad. But you know what? That's what happens to Christians. Blessed are you when you're persecuted for what? Righteousness' sake. Okay, let me just go ahead and say this. If we live right, we do what God wants us to do. Sometimes doing that means life's going to get tough, right?
Yeah.
And I know I'm being recorded, but I'm going to go ahead and say this anyway. I heard somebody the other day talk about, I really want to do the right thing. I don't want to live in sin. People use that phrase, live in sin, and you usually know what they're talking about, don't you? I don't want to live in sin. So please pray for me so this and that can happen. So things can be taken care of, so he can get a divorce, and so we can get married. And I'm like, I am happy for you guys to get married and everything, but you don't have to live in sin. You don't have to live in sin. You can wait. What? I can wait until... Aren't you being brutal? Well, yeah. Doing the right thing sometimes means it's going to be tough. Means you can't have sex until you get married. Which means if things aren't taken care of, you may have to wait. Sorry to burst anybody's bubble. I'm sorry that just comes to the forefront of my mind, but doesn't that happen sometimes?
Oh, yeah.
Does that mean sometimes I'm not going to get the raise, I'm going to lose my job and stuff like that? What? Yeah, because you did the right thing. Doing the right thing sometimes means it's going to hurt. Ultimately, you win. Ultimately, God's going to take care of you. But there are going to be a lot of periods where, you know what? You had to tell them the truth about your house. So you're not going to make as much money selling the house because you told them the truth. Right? Mm-hmm. I'm proud of you. You did the right thing. You told them the truth. You have to do that. Because we're Christians, because we're committed to that. Anyway, he's just talking about life's going to be tough. Life's going to be tough. But I love this last phrase. I don't want to read too much into this. But the last phrase is, do not damage the oil and the wine. It's as though he's saying, listen, it's going to be tough. But you know what? God's going to put limits on how tough it is. Does God put limits on how tough things are for you? What kind of limit does God put in your life? Yeah, as far as temptation goes, he's not going to let you experience more than you can take. Which often reminds me, I forget who I heard say this first, but the idea that, wow, God thinks a lot more of me than I do. Because sometimes it's like, I didn't know I could take this, right?
Yeah.
But God knows what your limitation is, and as far as temptation goes, he won't do that. I think that's being hinted at here. Verse 7, the Lamb opened up the fourth seal. So we're ready for the fourth seal. I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, this would be which one? Eagle, that's right, representing speak. Come, has to happen. I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. Okay, that's the reason I got this one goofy picture on here, the hand-drawn one. There's so many neat pictures on the web, but I could only find one where there was somebody riding behind, right? And maybe there's following behind, but probably on the same saddle, right? Who's behind Death?
Hades.
Hades. Hades goes, what is Hades?
A place to wait before you go to
The abode of the dead. That's where dead people go. That's exactly right. So death comes, and what's going to happen? You go to the abode of the dead. Excuse me. So this picture actually makes perfect sense. Hades followed close behind. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, plague, and by wild beasts of the earth. Oh, this is so interesting. Sword, famine, and plague. Sword would be, oh, by the way, this is the word for the big sword.
Big sword. Famine.
Yeah, which usually represents warfare. Okay, let's go back to the first century. Were there many wars that have taken place from Jesus' time till present? I've heard estimates on how many years there have been in the last 2,000 years where there wasn't war going on.
2?
And it's amazing to me. It's kind of like less than 100.
Wow.
20 to 50, something like that. I've just heard different estimates. But there's significant world wars as far as nations fighting against nation. That's gone on for the last 2,000 years. There's fighting today in a lot of areas of the world between nations, right? Okay, as a result of fighting, you guys help me out here because I'm rusty on some of my history, and I really need to go back with this. But for the longest time, more Americans died during which war than any other war?
Civil War.
Thank you, Civil War. It wasn't the number one reason, but one of the most significant reasons for the death toll was not gunfire.
Sickness.
It was what?
Sickness.
Sickness. That's exactly right. Because this is when the Army started developing some of their protocol that when you use the bathroom, you have to dig it and bury it and stuff like that. Didn't do that during Civil War. And so there was all sorts of, yeah, I'm not going to explain it. But a lot of disease. A lot of disease.
Well, they
So when
also
you-
get a stomach wound and drink some rock gut and stuff too. That stuff didn't help either.
Yeah. If memory serves me from what I've read, number one medical procedure during the Civil War?
Amputation.
Amputation. Amputation. Okay, anyway, so when he says sword, the very next thing when he says famine and plague, that just makes perfect sense. It kind of goes hand in hand. And the wild beast, we're going to see this. Again, you could see a couple different things. One of the problems in the Northern Kingdom, when the Northern Kingdom was destroyed and dissipated by which nation?
Assyria.
Assyria. One of the big problems they had after that, few enough people in the land that they had problems with wild beasts. They had problems with the wild beasts. When you don't have enough civilization, wild beasts are going to take over. Okay, that could be. I don't think that's what's going on here. It could be, because that's what happens as a result of war sometimes. And it just may be a natural consequence. But we're going to see in a couple chapters, we're going to use beasts to represent powerful nations and powerful anti-godly forces. And because of that, I'm thinking we're just talking about evil running wild. And as a result, the world's not a very safe place to live.
Hey, Mark,
Yes?
is there a significance of them getting a fourth of the earth? Is it just because one of 4 horses, or is there?
It limits.
Well, it could be limitation. I think he's talking about a fourth to talk about a significant number. This is very interesting, too, because later on we're going to talk about a third of the inhabitants of the earth being affected. The reason I find this so fascinating, can anybody tell me how many people died during the Great Plague in Europe?
Oh,
A lot.
Yeah.
There have been different estimates, but you know why they're mostly flawed? They're mostly flawed because, this is Dr. Roger Chambers, he was a great historian, and he said they're mostly flawed because today we don't realize you cannot do history if you take Christianity out of it, you take religion out of it. Especially before the Enlightenment, faith and religion had such an impact on everyday life, on political things and everything. Well, during the Black Plague, during the Great Plague that swept through Europe, everybody thought it was the apocalypse. And so they said, a third of everybody's dying. And that's where they got the number. They got it from the book of Revelation. They didn't get it from counting dead bodies.
thanks for the rats.
The difference between the fourth and the third that I
Yes.
pick over,
Yes.
pick over, it's a fourth of the earth,
Yes.
which does mean a third of the people could be in a fourth of the earth, but
Yes. And
not just.
by the way,
inhabitants.
that is significant too, because what people do does have an impact on the earth. On the earth that we're supposed to be stewards of. Yeah.
But
I think it just means a significant number, huge number.
But that, I'd also figure that could mean animals as well, not just people.
It
according
could,
to the
it
earth.
could, it could. You know, just some quick numbers during World War II. Most people know during World War II how many Jews were, well, not Jews, just Jews. Mainly Jews. In the concentration camps, the number usually comes in at 6 million. How many in Russia under Joseph Stalin?
Oh, yeah.
The number usually comes in around 20 million as far as casualties in Russia go. How about Mao in China? Mao Zedong.
Almost 28 or something.
Yeah, the numbers go as high as, what number did you get off that?
60 million?
Yeah, over 50 million. Yeah, that's one world war. That's one world war. Which, by the way, I remember this as a little kid. Late 60s, early 70s, the world broke 3 billion population. 3 billion. It's late 60s, early 70s, right? So when you talk about 50 million here, 20 million there, 6 million there, back when the world population was probably under 2 billion. These are significant numbers as far as people. Oh, dying as a result of the fighting, let alone other deaths. So there has been much fighting that's brought much disaster on the earth. Then he opened up the 5th seal. We're in verse 9. He opened up the 5th seal, and I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony that they had maintained. What does that mean? It means several things. It means because they were Christians and they didn't turn their back, which implies something, doesn't it? It implies some people did turn their back and they're not the faithful. Okay, but these are the ones who remain faithful to the end. Isn't that something Jesus kept saying to the churches? Remain faithful to the end. Don't give up, right? These are the ones pictured here who didn't give up. That's part of the reason I think the white horse is talking about this is the conquest of Christianity. And guess what happens? Persecution. It's a tough life. You suffer as a Christian. But you know what? The people who suffered and died and end up where? In heaven. Under the altar. Okay, we're going to develop that picture more a little bit later. But what are these ones saying? These are the faithful ones in heaven. Verse 10, they called out in a loud voice, how long? They're not saying, God, are you going to do something about this? They know God's going to do something about it. We know that. But how long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? Did I give somebody Genesis 4:10? Yes.
The Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground.
Yes. Yeah. That's after Cain kills Abel. Abel's blood cries out to the Lord. That picture of justice. It demands justice. What are we going to do about this? And that's what they're saying. They're saying, you know what? People deserve to be judged, and God's going to say, hey, I'm going to take care of that. They're going to get an answer. This question, by the way, is going to come up again. So since I've got a lot more to say about that, we'll pick up not next week, 2 weeks. Next week's VBS. This room will not be available to us. No room in the building is going to be available to us. So we will go 2 weeks from tonight, and we'll pick